the names and the color-coded outfits? Is that like your thing? You're all exactly the same?
Ha! No way! We're all unique snowflakes! Well, this usually never happens. This is really weird. Okay, stop talking! Anti-disestablishmentarianism! Seriously? Gah!
You know, at first glance, it's easy to look at Huey, Dewey, and Louie as just these three interchangeable kids, and you'd be right. Like, 100% you'd be right. Like, I'm sorry, but for the longest time, since their debut in 1937 and later animated appearance in 38, even though they took the time to show you that, hey, they are different, you know, color coding, and even have them introduce themselves, it didn't really matter because for the most part they were the same. That was the joke. It was a good joke, and it was a joke that was told later on. You have Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen in Full House. You have Tia and Tamara Mowry in Sister Sister. You have Alvin, Simon, and Theodore. And granted, there's always been some, you know, differentiating moments, usually as they get older. For example, with, say, Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, the joke is that actually it's to say they're playing the same person. Alright? Pretty much it's them and pretty much everything they're in for the most part. With Tia and Tamara Mowry, they did take the time to show how different they were, but that's because by that point they were teenagers, so that made sense. Look at, say, Phil and Lil. Alright? For the longest time, they were pretty much the same interests and everything. It would only be in later episodes, in later seasons, that you would really separate the two of them. Then you have, say, Alvin and the Chipmunks, which I think will play a bigger role in Huey, Dewey, and Louie going forward. But the thing is, with all of them, you can't help but think of one without the other. They're a package deal. Same with Huey, Dewey, and Louie. As a matter of fact, with Huey, Dewey, and Louie, all you really think of, you think of them the same way you would think of Kaiba and the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Like, no one thinks of just one Blue Eyes. You think of the fact, you know, he's got three. It's like his thing. Right, and then together they make one huge three-headed monstrosity. That's Huey, Dewey, and Louie, minus monstrosity. And for the longest time, the joke, the gimmick, the angle was, hey, there's three of them. It's way more fun when there's three of them, because even though they're pretty much the same, it's more the joke. You can tell the unit, the fact they're a focused force at one target. Usually they're Uncle Donald. It works. It's fun. And when it's come time to unpack them as characters, you really have to focus on not just the era and the medium, but also the characters they interact with. Because Huey, Dewey, and Louie, for the most part, are not standalone characters. They're really, for the longest time, they've been side characters in the story of Donald and Scrooge. And their relationships help sort of show exactly what kind of story they're going to have. So, when it comes to their Uncle Donald, if you look towards the Barks comics as well as the cartoons, you do see a slightly different Donald. Although I would argue that the cartoons show a Donald more in line with how he's been portrayed in the cartoons, especially during that time period. He's, you know, a bit of a playboy. He's a bit of a roughhouser in some ways. Like, you know, there's a certain confidence to him. There's a temper to him. Donald feels like a very human character in some ways because he does feel a bit more like you. With his reaction with the boys, he is sort of excited to have the idea of having nephews, and it does sort of ebb and flow with how it goes. Sometimes, like, okay, they're my nephews, I love them. Other times, like, oh my God, I'm going to kill these kids. It's just how that works. It's how family works, and it's a good story. If you go to, say, more of the comics, you see a more responsible Donald, a bit more lackadaisical in some ways. But he really is sort of stepping up to be that parent. And I think it's really fun because in the same way, like as much as he goes on adventures with the nephews, you know, no Uncle Scrooge just going on adventures with the nephews, I think what's more interesting is just his day-to-day life with the nephews. You know, there are stories where the boys try to skip school and they're trying to avoid their Uncle Donald. There are stories where they're doing a Junior Woodchuck assignment and, you know, they don't want, you know, their Uncle Donald to help, but he's going out there anyway. That's a really great moment. Then there's something like his arguments and back and forth with Neighbor Jones. And that story, you know, Donald pretty much becomes a kid. Like, he becomes this really immature, you know, man-child. And the boys have to go like, Uncle Donald, stop. Like, you and Neighbor Jones, look, we're 10, Uncle Donald. We can't keep being the adult here. Alright, and that's how those stories work. And it's fun for that. They do add this sort of extra layer to Donald, and the fact that, he just wants to, be the best him he can be for his nephews, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and it's fun. Like, I don't need Donald and the boys to go on adventures. Not to say that those stories are bad, it's just not what I need. Seeing the boys help Donald on the new career he's taken on today has always been more fun than them going off to some far off country. Somehow they can afford that. I don't know. It's weird.
No matter how bad things get, like really, really bad, you keep going. It's kind of ridiculous. You never had the common sense to give up before. Why start now?
With their Uncle Scrooge, it's an interesting dynamic. It's a bit more of an interesting dynamic, and it's not just because of my totally unbiased approach to my love of Scrooge McDuck. It just totally isn't. But it actually is a bit different. So, at times, the boys can be an antagonistic force to Uncle Scrooge, usually in regards to them siding with their Uncle Donald. Like, if you really put a gun to their head, they're going to pick their Uncle Donald or Uncle Scrooge. Most of the time. It'll be a hard choice. They won't like themselves for it, but they do love their Uncle Donald. And they do love their great Uncle Scrooge. For the most part, they like hearing stories from their Uncle Scrooge. They like hearing where he's been, the adventures he's been on, and they do like his energy. They like having that extra family member, because the sort of weird sadness to Huey, Dewey, and Louie is they don't have parents. Yes, I know D17. Trust me, I know D17. But the way it's framed, up until that point, the understanding was they don't have parents. And I think Don Rosa pointed this out greatly in The World's Richest Duck, when they're so happy with the idea of having another family member. So that was great, even more so with the impact he has on them. One thing Rosa and the 87 Ducktales have in common is they really do sort of flesh out the relationship Scrooge has with the nephews. And it's really sweet, it's really tender, in different ways. Scrooge, under Rosa, and even under Barks, as much as he loves his nephews and his family, he will never admit it openly, alright? It will be a secret he takes to his grave. And when we get to Donald, we'll actually go into that a bit more. Where with the 87 Ducktales, Scrooge will admit that he loves his nephews. As a matter of fact, in the first episode, not chronologically, but in terms of like an attempt to tell a cohesive story, it really is him saying it. Here we go.
To tell the truth, my life is pretty lonely. If it weren't for those pesky nephews... Yes, my nephews! Oh, they're grand lads. Quick, feisty, just like me. We're all changed out of the same dollar, if you know what I mean. Oh, I wish they were here so you could meet them.
He does like them, and this is something both 87 and Rosa's Scrooge have in common, is he does see a bit of himself in the nephews, and he wants to, help nurture and grow that. In the comic Dangerous Currency, epic, amazing DuckTales Dark McDuck crossover, Scrooge admits that one of the reasons he takes them on these adventures is because, running a world empire takes a lot. He doesn't get to spend as much time with them as he'd like, and he knows he can teach them better than anything they can learn in school. So it does two things. All right, he gets to invest in his nephews and spend time with them. That's what he wants. He wants to go on adventures with them. He wants to laugh and cry and be happy with them. All right, but he also has this job, this career that he's built for himself. And if he has to let one go, he'll let the career go. But there's no reason he can't if he's willing to put in that work. So there we go. I love it. I do love it. At the same time, though, Scrooge is also a bit of a child sometimes. Like, some of the best stories with Huey, Dewey, and Louie are when they have to save their Uncle Scrooge and their Uncle Donald. Usually they're being, and for lack of a better word, stupid. Look at something like Back to Long Ago, where they get so swept up in finding out that they have past lives that they don't realize, this is ridiculous. You could do the research and we could have all avoided this, but no, you didn't, and now here we are. Or, say, The Mines of King Solomon. In that story, Scrooge totally forgets any sense of propriety and security, and the nephew's like, we should really not, we should do something, oh, look at that, you didn't, oh, look at that. And there's the golden fleecing where, oh, gee, what happens? Scrooge gets kidnapped. And then Donald gets kidnapped by we can't say harpies, by the Larkies. And in one of my favorite moments, Huey and Louie go, all right, men, we have to go save our uncles. Like SEAL Team 6, Huey, Dewey, and Louie with the Junior Woodchuck Guidebook, which has answers to dealing with dragons. Love it. Answers dealing with dragons, how to summon animals with whistles, has secrets about how to craft, has secrets not seen since the Library of Alexandria burned. That book is frightening, and I love it. Junior Woodchuck's OP. They solo your verse. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. You know it's true.
Incredible! No woodchuck ever won so many merit badges in such a short time. Citizenship, urban survival, law enforcement, circus arts. Now, which badge will you go for next?
How about treasure hunting, Uncle Scrooge?
Who knows? We make a great team, don't we, lads? Give me 4.
Uncle Scrooge.
Ugh, what a family.
For the most part, that is Huey, Dewey, and Louie. And notice how, for the most part, I've talked about their relationship with other characters and how that impacts those characters as opposed to Huey, Dewey, and Louie themselves. That's because, for the longest time, they've always been this interchangeable group. Like, you can give them the, color-coordinated clothes. You can give them different names. They're always going to be viewed as the nephews, all right? It won't be until the 90s and Quack Pack that we go a bit further with trying to differentiate them. And the problem with Quack Pack is they really just went the route of Alvin and the Chipmunks. I mean, the color coordinating is kind of obvious here. I mean, legit, Huey wears the red, and he's a bit vain, he's a bit egotistical, and, he's in love with himself. That's Alvin. Simon, Dewey, Middle Child, Blue, Brains, there you go. Theodore, Louie, Green, bless his heart, he's simple, but you love him anyway. That's them. Quack Pack was an attempt to sort of reset the status quo for the most part, going back to the classic Donald and Scrooge stories in a 90s setting. Well, Donald and the Nephew story. And I think I'm too hard on Quack Pack, because Quack Pack isn't what I want, i.e. there's no Scrooge in it, or at least not enough of him. So I'm like, no. Also, it's weird to see humans here. It's the weirdest decision Disney made in the 90s to incorporate humans. We could just not. It really won't be until much later that we'll see a really well thought out approach to the nephews in terms of them as individuals. Because after Quack Pack, there's nothing. They just show up mostly in the background. They'll have the Quack Street Boys joke in House of Mouse, which is a good joke. You'll have them in Mickey's Once Upon a Time, but that's just them pretty much repeating their DuckTales 87 iteration. Then you have them in Kingdom Hearts, but again, it's just the DuckTales 87 version. The DuckTales 87 version was, for the longest time, the definitive Huey, Dewey, and Louie. And there's a reason for that. It worked. Like, really, all they did, for the most part, was take the colors and amp them up. The comics don't do that. The comics use the hats to differentiate them, to add the red, the blue, and the green for each nephew, but for the most part, that's it, save maybe some winter clothes, or, hey, we're in this country, let's wear these clothes, and they're color-coordinated the same way. You don't really get a lot of, character from it. Now, granted, the 87 DuckTales did give an episode for each nephew that I think really helps solidify them going forward, but we'll get to that when we get to D17. And speaking of D17, this, I have a lot of critiques for D17. I do. DuckTales 2017 was, in a lot of ways, lacking for me in a couple places. But when it comes to Huey, Dewey, and Louie, I think they knocked it out of the park. They had nothing but material to go off of, taking each time to not just give each nephew a specific look to help differentiate them, but also helping figure out exactly what character they would have, as well as, because for the first time in a long time, they're getting an actual story. Like, these episodes aren't just standalone things. Each episode will in some way connect to another, or there's a sense of continuity to the series. As much as I love 87 DuckTales, that continuity is not really there. there's a couple of multi-part episodes, and the series does a good job of showing how important the nephews are, how they can help save the day. As a matter of fact, a lot of really good stories will involve them saving the day. One of the biggest stories, Catch as Catch Can, that first episode starts and that last episode ends. That story starts and ends with Huey, Dewey, and Louie saving the day for their Uncle Scrooge. So, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in 87. But D17 went the extra mile, not just with the color coordinated, with, changing the wardrobe up while still honoring the color scheme, but by giving each nephew a distinct personality from each other, while still honoring the joke that, hey, they're triplets. And it works. And even if I don't necessarily like all the nephews, Dewey, I have to like the characters. I do like the attempt. I respect the attempt because it was a good attempt. With D17, in addition to, changing the costumes, they also decided to use this as a chance to flesh out each individual nephew on a different level. So you can view D17 as taking Scrooge, making him the center of the Disney Afternoon universe, which makes sense considering DuckTales was really about Scrooge, and DuckTales was like the shining gem of the Disney Afternoon series. With that in mind, it is sort of interesting to note that each season starts with a story involving Scrooge and a nephew, as well as ending with Scrooge and a nephew. So season 1, we have Dewey in his story Escape 2 from Atlantis, and the final episode of that season being Magica's Shadow War. Both those are stories involving Scrooge and Dewey. Season 2, you have Game Night of Terror, or was it Mysterious Game Night? One of those two. That is Louie and Scrooge. As a matter of fact, that episode ends with Louie and Scrooge realizing what they have in common, what links them with Della in terms of how sharp they are. And it ends with, mostly ends with the Glomtail story and the story with Bombi the Zombie, where Scrooge and Louie sort of realize, stupidly, that episode made no sense, that, no one deserves to be the richest man in the world. That was just stupid. And season 3 has Challenge of the Senior Woodchuck, where both Huey and Scrooge have a story. And then we have the final episode, where it's Scrooge versus Bradford, then Huey versus Bradford. And granted, that final poorly handled, if I'm honest. I have a lot of issues with how that last story was handled. And it sort of goes, whatever. That's a whole other discussion. Really, when you come to D17, you want to think about where Huey, Dewey, and Louie shine. It's not just in how they appear, in terms, or how they act differently, how they look differently. Like, you can definitely tell each one apart, even if you switch their clothes around. You can tell, all right, that one's Louie, that one's Dewey, that one's Huey. Apparently they do it all in reverse now. It's really cool. But you can sort of focus on their sort of personality. Dewey is more extroverted, more out there, which really seems to come from The Duck and the Iron Mask, where Dewey, in that 87 cartoon, wants to stand out, wants to not be constantly mistaken for one of his brothers. Louie is all about this sort of con, this deal, this angle, which he clearly got from Much Ado About Scrooge, where in that 87 episode, Louie bonds with a traveling salesman, the epitome of a con man. And Huey is like the last Junior Woodchuck. He likes things to be neat and orderly and organized, follows Junior Woodchuck guidebook to the letter. That's Send in the Clones, another 87 cartoon where Huey shows off his Junior Woodchuck knowledge as well as his initiative when he thinks something is wrong and he wants to protect the number one dime. Another great moment. Then, when you take those and go forward, you're then able to sort of expand on something more interesting, which is their own interpersonal relationships with other characters. So, let's shelve Scrooge right now, alright? It goes against every principle I've been taught, but let's do it. So, the boys have their own unique friendships. Huey is really friends with Gyro. He's really friends with Boyd. He's friends with Fenton Crackshell, or Fenton Cabrera. I need to do a video on Gizmo Duck, don't I? And a bunch of other characters that are unique to him. Dewey has Launchpad. Alright, and Dewey also has the enemy of Don Carnage, because of course he does. And Louie has Doofus as his personal enemy. And these are all unique. Like, they don't go around sharing enemies. I don't think Doofus even knows that Louie has siblings. Alright? I don't think that Don Carnage cares. And Huey's enemy is Mark Beaks. I hate Mark Beaks, so it doesn't matter. Huey's enemy is my enemy. And so we go from there. And then we come to their biggest relationship, Della Duck, and that's where a lot of the story's meat comes from. D17 is littered with the mystery of Della Duck, the emotional impact left by Della Duck being gone. And it really only works with Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Like, they try to have it work with Scrooge, try to have it work with Della, and I don't think it ever really fits with the story they're trying to tell and what they're trying to set up. And they definitely botch it at the end with the whole Webby thing, but whatever. With Della, they each respond to Della differently, and they each want something different from Della as their mom. So Louie, in his own way, wants discipline from his mom. He wants her to deal with him. He wants her to be proud of him. He wants her to get him. All three of them want her to get them. Dewey wants to know that he can be as wild and crazy as he is. He always feels like he's unique. His mother matches that energy. And it, in its own way, is that form of validation. All right, and he knows that, hey, this woman's just like me in a lot of ways. Like, we like the same music, we have the same sort of personality, we're gonna get along just fine. All right, and Huey wants to feel that someone appreciates his need for order and simplicity. Like, Della is very much in another world. She'd have been Korra from Legend of Korra. All right, but in addition to being a junior woodchuck, which Huey just is over the moon about, she loves the fact that he likes to play simple gardening games. You know, she's all set for like a big epic quest, but he just likes to garden, and she loves that about him. It's a great thing. It's a great thing how Della has been able to be so much for these boys, and it makes perfect sense. And again, the best thing about Della Duck and the impact she's had on them is this scene here.
She's our mom! Okay, it's just... First, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to get hurt. Then I couldn't tell you because I found out all this stuff and I didn't want you to hurt me. I'm sorry, okay? You're only sorry because you got caught! Louie, are you okay?
You kept a secret about Mom. That is not okay.
Ultimately, D17 does the most with Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and there really won't be another series like it or any other attempt to do it. And really, again, all my issues with D17, I like this the most. Alright? If you wanted to more classic, hey, there's three of them, that's the joke, and just with solid stories, you want to go to your Barks and Roses. If you want something with a bit more of a tighter family dynamic, I would personally say 87. The 87 DuckTales has a lot of that, especially with the dynamic between Scrooge and the boys, how much they like Launchpad, how they get along with Mrs. Beakley, the era of Bubba. As much as I just don't like the Bubba Gizmo Duck era, it's there. And of course, if you want the more story-focused, you want the more continuity, you want to see these characters grow and change a bit, that is your D17. The beauty of Huey, Dewey, and Louie is, because their premise is so simple, they can fit into any era with very little change. Again, even D17 takes elements from the original 87 cartoon and tries to honor the spirit of the original comics and cartoons. Or maybe I'm dead wrong. What did you guys think? Again, sorry this took so long. Oh, this was in development hell for the longest time. This isn't even the version I wanted, but I know we're coming to the end of the year, and I was like, you know what, fine, we'll just put it out, and what will be, will be. Alright, so that's one project that I'm overdue on done. Oh, let's get back to the lab and do another one. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing off. Thanks for watching. As always, may your fandom serve you well.